Jasmine Washington's small hands trembled as they pressed against Captain Miller's chest, performing CPR at 37,000 feet. Blood stained her yellow sundress, the same dress flight attendant Karen Bailey had mocked just minutes earlier. "Get this child away," another attendant shouted, but Jasmine didn't stop. She couldn't. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe in standing up against discrimination, and subscribe to hear more powerful stories about everyday heroes. Now, let's find out how a little girl ended up saving a pilot's life despite facing cruel prejudice. 8-year-old Jasmine Washington was not your typical third grader. Born and raised in a modest apartment in Harlem, New York, she possessed an intellectual curiosity that astounded everyone she met. While other children her age spent their free time playing with toys or watching cartoons, Jasmine devoured medical textbooks borrowed from the local library. Her bedroom walls weren't decorated with pop stars or cartoon characters but with detailed anatomical charts and inspirational quotes from pioneering black doctors. Jasmine's extraordinary intelligence had emerged early. By age 3, she could read at a second-grade level. By 5, she was solving complex math problems and conducting basic science experiments in her kitchen. Now, at 8, she was taking high school biology classes online and could recite the bones in the human body from memory. Her dream was unwavering, to become a cardiothoracic surgeon. This passion for medicine came naturally. Her mother, Denise Washington, worked grueling shifts as an emergency room nurse at Harlem Hospital. A single mother since Jasmine's father had abandoned them shortly after her birth, Denise poured everything into her daughter's education. Despite her exhaustion after 12-hour shifts, she always found time to nurture Jasmine's medical interests. "Knowledge is something no one can take from you," Denise would tell her daughter each night before bed. "And medical knowledge? That saves lives regardless of who possesses it." One chilly March evening, Denise had taught Jasmine CPR on a small mannequin she'd borrowed from the hospital training center. Jasmine had practiced diligently, her small hands finding the right rhythm on the plastic chest. Remember, Denise had instructed, 100 compressions per minute. Sing, "Staying Alive," in your head to keep the beat. For hours, Jasmine had pressed down on the mannequin's chest, determined to get it right. When Denise finally announced that her technique was perfect, Jasmine had beamed with pride. She never imagined she would need to use this skill so soon, or under such dramatic circumstances. The opportunity that changed everything came in the form of a letter from the prestigious Williams Science Academy in California. Jasmine had been selected for their summer camp for gifted students, an honor typically reserved for middle schoolers. The camp would feature lectures from leading medical researchers and hands-on laboratory experiences. It was a dream come true, but one that seemed financially out of reach. The tuition had been waived thanks to Jasmine's exceptional application essay on cellular regeneration, but the airfare remained a significant hurdle. For 3 months, Denise picked up extra shifts and sold homemade baked goods to neighbors. Jasmine contributed by tutoring neighborhood children in math and science, saving every dollar in a jar labeled "Future Doctor Fund." Finally, 2 weeks before departure, they had enough for a one-way ticket. Then, miraculously, Jasmine's science teacher, Mr. Harrison, arranged for a local community organization to sponsor her return flight. The path was clear. The night before the flight, their small apartment buzzed with activity. Denise ironed Jasmine's favorite yellow sundress, a brightness against the summer sky, she said. Jasmine carefully packed her most treasured possession, a child-sized doctor's kit given to her by her grandfather before he passed away the previous year. Though the stethoscope was merely a toy, it represented everything she aspired to become. "You remember what to do when you're bored?" Denise quizzed as she braided Jasmine's hair into neat cornrows adorned with yellow beads that matched her dress. "Yes, Mama," Jasmine recited confidently. "Give my unaccompanied minor paperwork to the gate agent. Stay with the flight attendant who'll escort me. Be polite but speak up if I need something." Denise hesitated, then added softly, "And if someone treats you differently because of your skin color?" Jasmine's eyes met her mother's in the mirror. This was a conversation they'd had many times before. "Stand tall, speak clearly, and know my worth," she answered. "Their prejudice reflects their character, not mine." Denise nodded, fighting back tears. Sending her 8-year-old daughter across the country alone terrified her, but she refused to let fear clip Jasmine's wings. The world might not always be kind to a brilliant black girl with big dreams, but Denise had raised her daughter to face that reality with dignity and determination. The next morning, they arrived at JFK Airport 3 hours early. Jasmine wore her yellow sundress, a light cardigan, and her most comfortable shoes. Her backpack contained snacks, her doctor's kit, and 3 advanced medical textbooks, far beyond her grade level but perfectly aligned with her comprehension. As they approached the check-in counter, Denise squeezed Jasmine's hand. "Remember what Dr. Mae Jemison said. Never be limited by other people's limited imaginations," Jasmine completed, reciting the quote from the first black female astronaut that had become her personal mantra. The unaccompanied minor process was thorough. Jasmine received a lanyard with her information, and the airline staff assured Denise they would take good care of her daughter. When the time came to say goodbye at the security checkpoint, Denise knelt to Jasmine's level. "You call me the minute you land, you hear?" "Yes, Mama." "And at science camp. Ask questions, take notes, and make connections," Jasmine finished with a smile. Denise pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, whispering, "I am so proud of you, my brilliant girl. So proud." As Jasmine walked away, hand in hand with an airline representative, she turned back once to wave. Denise waved back, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and anxiety. Her daughter looked so small among the crowd of travelers, yet she carried herself with the confidence of someone much older. Jasmine followed the representative through security and to her gate. Her heart raced with excitement. This was her first time flying, her first time leaving New York, her first big adventure. As she sat at the gate waiting to board, she pulled out Gray's Anatomy and began reviewing the chapter on the cardiovascular system. A few adults gave her curious glances, clearly surprised to see such a young child engrossed in complex medical literature. When her boarding group was called, Jasmine carefully marked her page, returned the book to her backpack, and stood up. She took a deep breath, remembering her mother's words, "Stand tall, speak clearly, know your worth." With that thought fortifying her, she stepped forward to begin her journey, unaware of the life-changing events that awaited her in the sky. Flight attendant Karen Bailey stood at the aircraft door, greeting passengers with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. At 45, Karen had spent nearly 2 decades in the airline industry, rising to senior cabin crew status through meticulous adherence to protocols rather than exceptional customer service. Born and raised in Westchester County, New York, Karen had grown up in a homogeneous suburban bubble where diversity was something encountered primarily through television. Her parents, both corporate executives, had emphasized appearance and social standing above empathy or cultural awareness. Karen's interactions with people of color had been limited largely to service workers, nannies, gardeners, and housekeepers employed by her family and neighbors. Relationships characterized by polite distance rather than genuine connection. This background had not prepared Karen for the diverse world of commercial aviation. While she'd learned to work alongside colleagues from various backgrounds, she'd never fully examined her unconscious biases. She considered herself colorblind, a stance that allowed her to avoid confronting her prejudices while simultaneously dismissing the unique challenges faced by minorities. When Jasmine approached the aircraft door, Karen's smile faltered momentarily. She glanced at the yellow sundress, the neat cornrows with matching beads, and immediately made assumptions. The unaccompanied minor lanyard around Jasmine's neck caught her attention. "I think you might be on the wrong flight, sweetie," Karen said, speaking with exaggerated slowness as if Jasmine might struggle to comprehend basic English. "This is the flight to Los Angeles. Are you lost?" Jasmine stood tall, just as her mother had taught her. "No, ma'am. I'm on the correct flight. I'm traveling as an unaccompanied minor to attend the Williams Science Academy summer camp. Her articulate response, delivered in a clear, confident voice, caught Karen off guard. I see, Karen replied, her tone shifting to one of disbelief. She held out her hand. Let me check your boarding pass again. Jasmine handed over her documents, which Karen examined with unnecessary scrutiny, flipping the boarding pass over multiple times as if expecting to find evidence of forgery. First class. Karen's eyebrows rose skeptically as she noted Jasmine's seat assignment, a generous upgrade provided by Mr. Harrison's community connections. Are you sure? Yes, ma'am, Jasmine answered patiently. It was arranged by my sponsor. Karen pressed her lips together, clearly unconvinced but finding no legitimate reason to challenge the valid boarding pass. Well, follow me then, she said, leading Jasmine down the aisle with a stiffness that communicated her discomfort. As they walked through the cabin, another flight attendant, Tanya Rodriguez, a warm-hearted woman in her 30s, noticed Karen's demeanor toward the young passenger. Unlike Karen, Tanya had grown up in a diverse neighborhood in Chicago and recognized the subtle manifestations of prejudice when she saw them. This is your seat, Karen announced flatly, gesturing to a spacious first-class window seat. The call button is above if you need anything. Her tone clearly communicated that Jasmine should avoid pressing it. Jasmine settled into the plush seat, placing her backpack beneath the seat in front of her. Thank you, ma'am. Karen turned without acknowledging Jasmine's politeness and strode back toward the front of the aircraft. Once she was out of earshot, Tanya approached with a genuine smile. First time flying, she asked kindly. Jasmine nodded. Yes, ma'am. Well, you're in for a treat. The view above the clouds is magical, Tanya said. I'm Tanya, by the way. If you need anything during the flight, don't hesitate to ask, me or any other flight attendant. The subtle emphasis wasn't lost on Jasmine, who recognized Tanya's implied support. Thank you. I'm Jasmine. That's a beautiful name, Tanya replied. And I love your dress. Yellow is my favorite color. As Tanya moved away to assist other boarding passengers, Jasmine retrieved Gray's Anatomy from her backpack and resumed her reading. She was deep in a passage about cardiac valves when she felt someone hovering beside her. Excuse me, but I believe that's my seat. Jasmine looked up to see a tall white man in an expensive suit, his expression transitioning from irritation to surprise as he registered that his seatmate was a young black girl. Oh, I'm in 3B, Jasmine clarified, pointing to her seat number. Are you 3A or 3C? The man. Maxwell Thompson, a 42-year-old investment banker, checked his boarding pass. 3C, he confirmed, his tone softening slightly but still tinged with annoyance at the prospect of sitting beside a child for a transcontinental flight. Maxwell stowed his briefcase in the overhead compartment and settled into the aisle seat, creating as much distance as possible between himself and Jasmine. He pulled out his laptop, determinedly ignoring her presence. Minutes later, Karen returned for the pre-departure beverage service. Her entire demeanor transformed as she addressed Maxwell. Good morning, sir. Can I offer you something to drink before takeoff? Perhaps a mimosa or Bloody Mary? Her voice was melodious, her smile radiant. Scotch, neat, Maxwell replied without looking up from his laptop. Certainly, sir. Karen efficiently prepared his drink, then placed it on his tray with a cocktail napkin. Only then did she glance at Jasmine, her expression cooling noticeably. Apple juice? She asked, already pouring it without waiting for a response. May I have water instead, please? Jasmine requested politely. Karen's lips tightened. We're serving apple juice or orange juice for children during boarding, she stated, despite having offered Maxwell a full range of options. I understand. Orange juice would be fine then, thank you, Jasmine replied, maintaining her composure. As Karen handed her the orange juice with considerably less care than she'd shown Maxwell, she added under her breath, just loud enough for Jasmine to hear, some children need to learn their place. The comment stung, but Jasmine focused on her book, determined not to let Karen's behavior spoil her excitement. She'd encountered prejudice before, from teachers who expressed surprise at her advanced reading level, from store security guards who followed her in shops, from playground parents who pulled their children away. Her mother had prepared her for these moments, teaching her that her response would define her character more than their actions ever could. Maxwell, however, caught Karen's comment and glanced at Jasmine's book with newfound curiosity. The title surprised him. This was no children's story but a complex medical text. As Karen walked away, he found himself reconsidering his initial judgment of his young seatmate. The aircraft taxied and took off with a powerful thrust that pushed Jasmine back into her seat. Despite her nervousness, she couldn't help but smile as the ground fell away beneath them. New York City, the only home she'd ever known, transformed into a miniature model below, buildings and streets reduced to toys and ribbons. She pressed her face against the window, marveling at how clouds looked from above, like vast cotton fields stretching to the horizon. "First flight?" Maxwell asked, his initial annoyance softening at Jasmine's evident wonder. "Yes, sir," she replied without taking her eyes off the window. "It's amazing how small everything becomes." Maxwell nodded, remembering his own first flight decades earlier. "Perspective changes everything," he offered, then returned to his laptop. Once the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off and the cabin crew began meal service. Karen pushed the cart down the aisle, her professional smile firmly in place as she approached first-class passengers. "Our options today are grilled chicken with roasted vegetables or pasta primavera," she announced warmly to Maxwell. "And our wine selections include a California Chardonnay or Italian Merlot." "The chicken, please," Maxwell replied. "And the Merlot." Karen served his meal with graceful efficiency, ensuring his wine glass was properly filled and his silverware correctly positioned. Then she turned to Jasmine with noticeably less enthusiasm. "We have a children's meal for you," she stated, placing a small box containing chicken nuggets, apple slices, and a cookie before Jasmine without offering any choice. "Actually, I'd like the regular meal, please," Jasmine said politely. "The chicken option sounds good." Karen's smile tightened. "The children's meal is specifically designed for passengers under 12, she insisted. "It's airline policy." This was untrue. The airline offered children's meals as an option, not a requirement, but Karen clearly expected Jasmine to accept her authority without question. Before Jasmine could respond, the aircraft encountered unexpected turbulence. The plane dipped suddenly, causing Karen to stumble forward. The orange juice she was pouring for another passenger splashed across the aisle, several drops landing on Jasmine's yellow sundress. "Oh no!" Jasmine exclaimed, immediately reaching for napkins to dab at the spreading stain. Instead of apologizing, Karen's face hardened. "See what happens when children don't remain still in their seats," she said loudly, as if Jasmine had caused the turbulence. "That dress is completely inappropriate for air travel anyway. Too bright, too attention-seeking." The comment was clearly meant to humiliate, and it succeeded. Several nearby passengers glanced at Jasmine, some with sympathy, others with the uncomfortable awkwardness of witnesses to discrimination who choose not to intervene. "Here," Jasmine said softly, extending napkins to help clean the spill on the aisle carpet. Karen snatched them away. "Don't touch anything else. You'll only make it worse." Her voice carried through the quiet cabin. "Some people simply don't know how to behave in first class." Maxwell, who had been absorbed in a spreadsheet, looked up at Karen's harsh tone. He observed the interaction with growing discomfort, noting the contrast between Jasmine's polite demeanor and Karen's unprofessional hostility. "It was just turbulence," he found himself saying. "The spill wasn't her fault." Karen's expression flickered with surprise at being challenged by a white male passenger. "Of course, sir. I'm simply trying to maintain order in the cabin," she replied, her tone instantly softening. Perhaps I can offer you another glass of wine for the inconvenience. No thank you, Maxwell replied coolly. But perhaps you could bring the young lady her chosen meal rather than making assumptions about her preferences. Karen's smile became strained. Certainly, sir. She turned to Jasmine. I'll bring you the adult meal shortly, she said, emphasizing adult as if it were absurd. When Karen retreated to the galley, Jasmine whispered, "Thank you," to Maxwell, who responded with a slight nod before returning to his work. Left alone with her thoughts, Jasmine tried to focus on her book rather than the sticky orange spots marring her dress. To distract herself, she reached into her backpack and retrieved her treasured doctor's kit. The plastic stethoscope might be a toy, but examining it brought comfort in this unfamiliar environment. Jasmine carefully polished the chest piece with her sleeve, then placed the earpieces in her ears, pretending to listen to her own heartbeat. The familiar action calmed her, connecting her to her dreams and to her mother's encouragement. Karen returned with the promised meal, setting it before Jasmine with barely concealed contempt. As she did so, she noticed the doctor's kit. "What's this?" she asked, her voice deliberately loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. "Playing doctor? Shouldn't you be playing with dolls instead?" She laughed, a sharp sound designed to invite others to join in her mockery. Several passengers chuckled, assuming Karen was engaging in friendly teasing rather than targeted humiliation. Jasmine's cheeks burned with embarrassment as she quietly returned the stethoscope to her bag. "I'm studying to become a cardiothoracic surgeon," she explained softly. This only prompted louder laughter from Karen. "A surgeon? Well, aren't you ambitious?" Her tone made it clear she found the idea ridiculous. "Maybe aim for something more realistic, sweetie." The condescension was unmistakable. The underlying message, that a young black girl should limit her dreams, hung in the air, unspoken but painfully evident to Jasmine, who had encountered similar attitudes before. From further down the aisle, Tanya observed the interaction with growing concern. During their next crossing in the galley, she confronted Karen privately. "That was unnecessary," she said firmly. "She's just a child." Karen shrugged, arranging drinks on her service cart. "I'm just being realistic. Kids need to understand the world has limits. Or maybe some adults need to examine their prejudices," Tanya countered. Karen's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're implying, but I treat all passengers equally. It's just that certain people have unrealistic aspirations. I'm doing her a favor by introducing a dose of reality." The coded language wasn't lost on Tanya, who had heard similar justifications for discrimination throughout her career. "That certain people comment is exactly the problem, Karen. That child deserves encouragement, not ridicule." "Oh, please," Karen dismissed her colleague with a wave. "Save the social justice lecture. We have work to do." As the women returned to their duties, Jasmine sat quietly in her seat, picking at her meal without appetite. She had overheard enough of the galley conversation to understand its meaning. Though her eyes burned with unshed tears, she refused to cry. Instead, she retreated into silence, the joyous wonder of her first flight now tarnished by the familiar sting of prejudice. Would you continue watching if Jasmine simply accepted this treatment and remained silent? Or do you believe she should stand up for herself despite her young age? Comment number 1 if you think discrimination should always be challenged no matter your age, or number 2 if you think children should sometimes just stay quiet to avoid conflict. Like this video if you've ever witnessed discrimination on public transportation, and subscribe to hear how this shocking story continues. What do you think will happen next in Jasmine's journey? Will someone else stand up for her, or will she face even more humiliation? 2 hours into the flight, as the aircraft cruised at 37,000 feet somewhere over the Midwest, Captain James Miller shifted uncomfortably in the cockpit's left seat. At 58, the veteran pilot had logged over 20,000 flight hours during his 30-year career with the airline. He prided himself on his perfect health record and rigorous fitness routine that kept him well within FAA medical certification standards. Yet something felt decidedly wrong today. What had begun as mild discomfort shortly after takeoff had gradually intensified into a persistent pressure across his chest. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the cockpit's cool temperature. His uniform shirt felt suddenly constricting, as if it had shrunk a size since he'd donned it during pre-flight preparations. First Officer Sarah Turner, 42, glanced sideways at her captain. She had flown with Miller many times before and knew him as a consummate professional, calm, focused, and always impeccably put together. The pallor of his skin and the sweat on his brow immediately triggered her concern. "Everything all right, Captain?" she asked, keeping her tone casual while her eyes evaluated his condition more critically. Miller forced a smile. "Just a bit of indigestion, I think. That airport breakfast burrito is fighting back." Turner wasn't convinced. In her 15 years of flying, she had developed an intuition about medical issues in the cockpit. The FAA's strict medical requirements for pilots meant that any sign of physical distress needed to be taken seriously. "Your color doesn't look great, James," she said, dropping the formal "Captain" to emphasize her personal concern. "And you're sweating pretty heavily." Miller loosened his tie slightly. "It'll pass," he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Let's focus on that weather system we'll be encountering over Colorado. Dispatch says we might need to adjust our routing." Turner allowed the subject change, knowing that pushing too hard might make Miller defensive. Pilots, with their careers dependent on medical clearances, sometimes downplayed health concerns for fear of being grounded. Instead, she made a mental note to keep close watch on his condition. Over the next 20 minutes, Miller's symptoms worsened dramatically. His breathing became increasingly labored, and the sweat now drenched his shirt collar. When he winced and clutched briefly at his left arm, Turner knew they were facing a serious situation. "James, I think you need medical attention," she said firmly, no longer concealing her alarm. "These are textbook heart attack symptoms." No, Miller protested weakly. "Just need to catch my breath." As if to contradict his reassurance, a wave of pain visibly washed over him. He gasped, his right hand clutching his chest while his left gripped the control yoke with white knuckles. "That's it," Turner decided. "I'm taking control of the aircraft. You need help now." "Aircraft is yours," Miller managed to say, following proper transfer of control protocol even as his condition deteriorated. Turner immediately pressed the interphone button to contact the cabin crew. "This is the first officer. I need the senior flight attendant to the cockpit immediately. Emergency situation." In the main cabin, Karen Bailey received the call. Her irritation at being summoned during meal service vanished when she heard the urgency in Turner's voice. Whatever her faults, Karen took aviation safety protocols seriously. She quickly instructed another flight attendant to cover her section and hurry to the cockpit. "What's the situation?" she asked as Turner opened the cockpit door, security procedures momentarily expedited by the emergency. The scene inside answered her question. Captain Miller sat slumped in his seat, his complexion ashen, his breathing shallow and rapid. Even to Karen's untrained eye, he looked seriously ill. "I think the captain's having a heart attack," Turner explained, her hands steady on the controls as she simultaneously flew the plane and managed the crisis. "I need you to handle the medical emergency while I coordinate with air traffic control for an emergency landing. We're about 40 minutes from Denver if we increase speed." Karen's training kicked in. "I'll make an announcement for medical personnel," she said, professionalism temporarily overriding her personal biases. Turner nodded. "I'll contact dispatch and ATC to arrange priority landing clearance. Keep me updated on his condition." As Karen returned to the cabin, Turner switched to the ATC frequency. "Denver Center, this is United 2947 declaring a medical emergency. We have a pilot incapacitation situation and request immediate vectors for approach to Denver International. Request priority handling and emergency services standing by." In the main cabin, Karen picked up the PA handset. Her voice, now stripped of its earlier condescension, rang clearly through the aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical situation on board. If there are any doctors, nurses, or passengers with advanced medical training, please identify yourselves to a flight attendant immediately." The announcement sent a ripple of concern through the cabin. Passengers exchanged worried glances as they processed this unexpected development. In first class, Maxwell Thompson looked up from his laptop with alarm, while Jasmine sat very still, her young mind immediately connecting the announcement to her mother's emergency room stories. After a moment of hesitation, 2 passengers responded to Karen's call. A middle-aged man in 14C identified himself as a dentist, while a woman from 22A introduced herself as a veterinarian. Both had basic life support training but admitted they weren't current on human emergency care protocols. "Is it a passenger?" the dentist, Dr. Howard Klein, asked as Karen led them to the front of the aircraft. "It's the captain," Karen replied grimly. "Possible cardiac event." Dr. Klein's expression tightened. "I've only done CPR refreshers on mannequins. Not ideal for a real cardiac situation." The veterinarian, Dr. Susan Blake, nodded in agreement. "I treat animals, not people. The principles are similar, but..." Karen interrupted their concerns. "You're what we've got," she said bluntly. "First Officer Turner is flying the plane and arranging an emergency landing. We need to keep the captain stable until we can get him proper medical care." At the cockpit door, Karen paused to brief Tanya, who had been managing the increasingly anxious passengers. "We're diverting to Denver," she explained. "ETA about 40 minutes. We have a dentist and a vet to help, but it's not looking good. The captain seems to be having a heart attack." As the adults conferred in hushed, urgent tones, Jasmine sat forward in her seat, straining to hear their conversation. Her medical books had covered cardiac emergencies in detail, and her mother had specifically trained her in CPR. Though just a child, she understood the gravity of the situation and the critical importance of immediate intervention during a heart attack. She debated whether to speak up. Karen's earlier ridicule had stung deeply, and the prospect of further humiliation made her hesitate. Yet she knew, from both her reading and her mother's teachings, that every minute without proper care decreased survival chances during a cardiac event. Taking a deep breath, Jasmine unfastened her seatbelt and stood up. Maxwell glanced at her with surprise. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I think I can help," she replied simply, gathering her courage as she made her way toward the group of adults at the front of the plane. Karen was just opening the cockpit door to allow Dr. Klein and Dr. Blake inside when she noticed Jasmine approaching. Her expression immediately hardened. "Get back to your seat," she ordered sharply. "This isn't a game or a time for make-believe doctors." Jasmine stood her ground, though her heart raced with anxiety. "I know CPR," she said clearly. "My mother is an ER nurse, and she trained me properly. I understand the symptoms of cardiac arrest and the proper response protocols." Karen's laugh was dismissive. "This is real life, not playtime. Go back to your seat before I have you written up for interference with crew member duties." The conversation had drawn the attention of nearby passengers, including Maxwell, who had followed Jasmine to the front of the cabin. Having witnessed Karen's pattern of behavior toward the child, he felt compelled to intervene. "Perhaps you should listen to her," he suggested to Karen. "She's been reading advanced medical texts throughout the flight." Karen's expression flickered with uncertainty, caught between her prejudice and the growing audience of witnesses. Before she could respond, Tanya stepped forward. "Let's hear what she knows," Tanya said. "We're in an emergency situation with limited resources. We can't afford to dismiss any potential help." A commotion from the cockpit interrupted their debate. Dr. Klein emerged, his expression grave. "He's deteriorating fast," he reported. "His pulse is weak and irregular, and he's becoming unresponsive. I think we're dealing with full cardiac arrest, but I'm not confident in my assessment or treatment options." The gravity of the situation hung heavy in the air. Captain Miller's life was slipping away while they argued about whether to allow a child to help. If it is cardiac arrest, Jasmine said with surprising authority, he needs immediate CPR to maintain blood flow to his brain until the AED can be used. Every minute without proper circulation reduces survival chances by 7 to 10%. The precise medical terminology and statistics coming from the mouth of an 8-year-old girl momentarily stunned the adults into silence. Karen recovered first, physically positioning herself to block Jasmine from the cockpit. "This is absurd," she declared. "I will not allow a child to interfere in a life-or-death situation. Children should know their place, especially in an emergency." From inside the cockpit, First Officer Turner called out urgently, "He's not responding at all now. We need help immediately." Dr. Klein looked helplessly at Dr. Blake, both professionals clearly out of their depth with this specific medical emergency. Tanya made a split-second decision, gently but firmly moving Karen aside. "Let her through," she said with quiet authority. "We have no better options right now." Karen's face flushed with anger, but the combination of multiple witnesses and the dire emergency prevented her from further obstruction. With a final glare at Jasmine, she stepped aside, allowing the child to enter the cockpit where Captain Miller's life hung in the balance. Jasmine entered the cockpit with steady determination, her earlier timidity replaced by focused purpose. The small space was crowded with First Officer Turner still at the controls, Dr. Klein standing awkwardly behind the captain's seat, and Dr. Blake monitoring Miller's pulse at his wrist. Captain Miller himself sat slumped in his chair, his complexion gray, his breathing shallow and irregular. "He's barely responsive," Dr. Blake reported, her veterinary training providing some baseline knowledge of critical care but clearly insufficient for the current emergency. "Pulse is weak and thready. Has anyone started CPR?" Jasmine asked, her voice surprisingly authoritative despite her youth. The adults exchanged uncertain glances. "We've been monitoring him," Dr. Klein admitted. "But I'm hesitant to begin compressions without being certain he's in actual cardiac arrest. In dental settings, we're trained to wait for complete unresponsiveness." Jasmine moved closer to assess the captain. "In a suspected heart attack, it's better to start CPR too early than too late," she explained, repeating her mother's exact words from their training sessions. "May I check him?" Dr. Klein stepped back, tacitly yielding to this unusual but confident young medical advisor. Jasmine carefully observed Captain Miller's breathing, noting its irregularity. She placed 2 fingers against his carotid artery, feeling for the pulse that should be strong at this vital point. "His pulse is extremely weak and irregular," she announced. "We need to lay him flat for proper assessment and potential CPR." First Officer Turner spoke up without taking her eyes off the flight controls. "We can't move him to the cabin floor while we're in flight. There's not enough space, and the turbulence would make CPR impossible. Then we need to recline his seat as far as possible," Jasmine decided. "And we need the AED immediately." From the cockpit doorway, Karen's voice cut in sharply. "This is completely inappropriate. She's playing doctor with a man's life." Maxwell, who had been observing from just behind Karen, had seen enough. "The child clearly knows what she's talking about," he countered firmly. "More than anyone else here, apparently." Karen turned to him, her professional demeanor cracking. "She's an 8-year-old. This isn't a school play or a science project. This is a real medical emergency." "Exactly," Tanya interjected. "A real emergency where the patient's life matters more than your preconceptions about who can provide help." She turned to another flight attendant. "Bring the AED now." As the argument continued outside the cockpit, Captain Miller's condition suddenly worsened. His irregular breathing stopped completely, and his body went limp. "He's not breathing," Dr. Blake exclaimed, the alarm in her voice cutting through the tension. Jasmine didn't hesitate. "We need to start CPR immediately. Help me recline his seat as much as possible." Dr. Klein located the seat controls, lowering the captain's chair to its maximum recline position, not ideal for CPR, but the best they could manage in the confined space. Jasmine quickly assessed the situation, her mind recalling every detail of her mother's training. "I need to start chest compressions," she announced, positioning herself beside the captain. Despite her small stature, she knew proper technique could overcome her size limitations. "Can someone time me? We need to maintain a rate of 100 compressions per minute." Dr. Blake pulled out her phone to use as a timer. "Ready when you are." Jasmine placed her hands in the center of Captain Miller's chest, one on top of the other, fingers interlaced just as her mother had taught her. She began compressions, pushing down firmly and allowing the chest to recoil completely between each push. 1, 2, 3, 4, she counted aloud, establishing a rhythm. In her head, she heard her mother's voice, sing, "Staying alive, to keep the beat." As she continued compressions, the flight attendant returned with the automated external defibrillator, AED. Karen remained in the doorway, her expression a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration as she watched the young girl performing textbook-perfect CPR. "The AED's here," Tanya announced. "Should we use it now?" "Not yet," Jasmine replied between compressions. "We need to continue CPR for at least 2 minutes before the first analysis. It helps circulate blood and can make the defibrillator more effective." Dr. Klein stared at her in amazement. "How do you know all this?" Jasmine didn't pause her compressions as she answered. "My mom's an ER nurse. She teaches CPR and made sure I learned properly. I've read all her medical textbooks and practice with her training mannequin." First Officer Turner spoke from the pilot's seat, where she continued to fly the aircraft while coordinating with air traffic control. "Denver ATC has cleared us for priority landing. ETA 22 minutes. Emergency services will meet us at the gate. We need to continue CPR until then," Jasmine said, her small arms already beginning to tire from the exertion. "Can someone take over compressions when I get tired? I can coach you through the proper technique." Dr. Klein nodded. "Just tell me when." After nearly 3 minutes of continuous compressions, Jasmine's arms began to shake with fatigue. "I need to switch now," she announced. "Remember, push hard and fast in the center of the chest. Allow full recoil between compressions." Dr. Klein took over, following Jasmine's guidance on hand position and rhythm. Jasmine turned her attention to the AED, opening the case and removing the device with practiced movements. "We should analyze his heart rhythm now," she said. "Everyone stand clear while I attach the pads." The adults watched in amazement as the child confidently prepared the defibrillator, removing the adhesive backing from the electrode pads. "We need to expose his chest," she instructed. Dr. Blake quickly unbuttoned the captain's shirt while Jasmine held the pads ready. "Place one pad on the upper right chest, and the other on the lower left side," Jasmine directed, demonstrating the correct positions. "Make sure they adhere firmly to the skin." With the pads properly placed, Jasmine pressed the Analyze button on the AED. "Everyone stand clear," she commanded with remarkable authority. "Do not touch the patient while the AED is analyzing." The device emitted a series of beeps as it assessed Captain Miller's heart rhythm. After several tense seconds, a robotic voice announced, "Shock advised. Stand clear. Press flashing button to deliver shock." "This means he's in ventricular fibrillation or ventricular tachycardia," Jasmine explained, her medical knowledge continuing to astonish the adults around her. "His heart is beating chaotically or too fast to pump effectively. The shock can reset it to a normal rhythm." She ensured everyone was clear of contact with the captain, then pressed the flashing button. Captain Miller's body jerked as the electrical shock passed through his heart. "Resume CPR immediately," Jasmine instructed as soon as the shock was delivered. Dr. Klein immediately restarted chest compressions while Jasmine monitored the captain's condition. In the cockpit doorway, Karen stood frozen, her earlier skepticism replaced by stunned realization. This child, whom she had mocked and belittled, was now directing a life-saving medical intervention with more knowledge and composure than any of the adults present. As Dr. Klein continued compressions, Jasmine felt for a pulse at the captain's neck. Her face remained concentrated, betraying neither hope nor despair as she carefully assessed his condition. "Still no pulse," she reported. "Continue CPR. We'll analyze with the AED again in 2 minutes." First Officer Turner, managing both the aircraft and her emotions, spoke up from her position. "You're doing great, Jasmine. Denver Emergency Services are standing by. We're beginning our descent now." Outside the cockpit, passengers had become aware that something serious was occurring. Maxwell Thompson had taken it upon himself to reassure those nearby, explaining that the captain had fallen ill but was receiving care. He deliberately emphasized that a young medical prodigy was assisting, his description reflecting his newfound respect for Jasmine. Inside the crowded cockpit, the rhythm of CPR continued, compression after compression, breath after breath, each one a fighting chance for Captain Miller's life. Jasmine, initially dismissed because of her age and race, had become the cornerstone of this emergency response, her knowledge transcending prejudice in the face of life's most urgent reality. Jasmine's small hands returned to Captain Miller's chest as she took over compressions again. Dr. Klein stepped back, massaging his aching wrists. Despite her size, Jasmine maintained textbook perfect form, elbows locked, shoulders directly over her hands, using her body weight rather than arm strength to achieve the necessary depth. 1, 2, 3, 4, she counted steadily, the rhythm of her compressions precisely matching the beat of the Bee Gees, Staying Alive, playing in her head. Her mother had taught her this trick during their practice sessions, explaining that the song's tempo of 103 beats per minute aligned perfectly with the recommended compression rate. "Make sure you're pushing deep enough," she instructed Dr. Klein, who watched with newfound respect. "Adults need at least 2 inches of compression depth. You have to really push down." Beads of sweat formed on Jasmine's forehead as she continued the physically demanding task. The yellow beads in her cornrows clicked softly with each compression, and the orange juice stains on her sundress had been joined by smears of blood from where Captain Miller had bitten his lip during the initial stages of his cardiac event. From her position at the flight controls, First Officer Turner monitored both the aircraft's descent toward Denver and the ongoing medical intervention behind her. 15 minutes to landing, she reported. "How's he doing?" "No change yet," Jasmine replied, her voice steady despite her exertion. "That's not unusual. CPR keeps blood flowing to the brain and vital organs, but it rarely restarts the heart on its own. We need to continue until we can deliver another shock with the AED." Dr. Blake checked her timer. "It's been almost 2 minutes since the last analysis." Jasmine nodded. "We should check his rhythm again. I'll need to stop compressions for that." She completed her current set, then sat back. "Everyone clear for analysis." She pressed the Analyze button on the AED once more. The device beeped as it assessed Captain Miller's heart rhythm, the second stretching into an eternity as everyone held their breath. Finally, the mechanical voice announced, "Shock advised. Stand clear. Press flashing button to deliver shock." "This is good," Jasmine explained, her teaching instinct emerging even in crisis. "It means his heart is still in a shockable rhythm, which gives us a better chance of successful resuscitation." After ensuring everyone was clear, she delivered the second shock. Captain Miller's body jerked, then fell still again. Immediately, Jasmine returned to her position to resume compressions. "Dr. Klein, can you tilt his head back slightly to maintain an open airway?" she asked, demonstrating the proper chin lift technique without interrupting her compressions. "We don't have proper rescue breathing equipment, but we need to ensure maximum oxygen flow." The dentist followed her instructions, amazed at the child's command of emergency protocols. "You know more about this than I do," he admitted. "And I've taken mandatory CPR courses for 15 years. My mom made sure I understood everything completely," Jasmine explained between counts. She says medical knowledge only works if you can apply it correctly under pressure. In the doorway, Karen Bailey watched the scene with conflicting emotions. Her initial dismissal of Jasmine had given way to reluctant admiration, then to uncomfortable self-reflection. The prejudices that had seemed so natural hours earlier now appeared glaringly wrong as this young black girl fought to save a life with knowledge and skills Karen herself didn't possess. "We need the AED again," Tanya reminded them as 2 minutes approached since the last analysis. As they prepared for a third analysis, Jasmine recalled a memory from 6 months earlier. Her mother returning home from a particularly difficult ER shift, still wearing scrubs stained with a patient's blood. "I lost one today," Denise had told her daughter, eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion and emotion. "But I know I gave them every possible chance. That's all we can ever do, Jasmine. Give every patient every possible chance." The memory strengthened Jasmine's resolve. Captain Miller would get every possible chance she could provide. The AED completed its third analysis, once again advising a shock. After delivering it, Jasmine immediately checked for a pulse. For a brief moment, her expression brightened. "I felt something," she announced cautiously. "Very faint, but it might be a pulse. Continue compressions while I double-check." She placed her fingers precisely on the carotid artery, concentrating entirely on the sensation beneath her fingertips while Dr. Klein maintained compressions. After several seconds, she nodded. "There's definitely a pulse. It's weak and irregular, but it's there. Stop compressions so I can confirm." Dr. Klein paused, and everyone in the cramped cockpit held their breath as Jasmine assessed Captain Miller. For 10 long seconds, she remained motionless, focusing entirely on detecting the faintest signs of life. "He has a pulse," she confirmed, relief evident in her voice. "It's getting stronger. And look, his color is improving slightly." Indeed, the ashen gray of Captain Miller's complexion had begun to give way to a less alarming pallor. As they watched, his chest rose slightly with a shallow breath, then another. "He's breathing on his own," Dr. Blake observed with amazement. "It worked." "We're not out of danger yet," Jasmine cautioned, her medical knowledge preventing premature celebration. "He needs immediate hospital care. The AED has stabilized his rhythm temporarily, but the underlying cause of his cardiac arrest remains." First Officer Turner spoke up from the controls. 8 minutes to landing. Emergency services are standing by at the gate." Captain Miller's eyelids fluttered, then opened briefly. His gaze, unfocused at first, gradually settled on the small figure leaning over him, a young black girl in a stained yellow sundress, her expression simultaneously childlike and impossibly professional. "What?" he managed weakly, confusion evident in his single word. "Don't try to talk, sir," Jasmine instructed gently. "You had a cardiac event. We've stabilized you with CPR and defibrillation, but you need to stay very still and conserve your energy." Miller's eyes widened slightly at being addressed so competently by a child, but he complied, too weak to do otherwise. Jasmine turned to the others. "We need to monitor him continuously until the paramedics arrive. The rhythm could deteriorate again without warning." "Denver approach has cleared us for immediate landing," First Officer Turner reported. "Cabin crew, prepare for arrival." Tanya nodded and returned to the main cabin to organize the other flight attendants, while Karen remained transfixed in the doorway, her worldview visibly reshaping itself before everyone's eyes. "I'll monitor his pulse," Dr. Blake offered, allowing Jasmine a moment's rest after her extraordinary exertion. Jasmine nodded gratefully and sat back on her heels, her small body suddenly registering the fatigue of performing extended CPR. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, inadvertently smearing a trace of the captain's blood across her cheek. The image was striking, a young child bearing the physical evidence of her life-saving efforts, her yellow sundress stained, her expression reflecting a maturity far beyond her years. Maxwell Thompson, observing from behind Karen, found himself profoundly moved by the scene. This was courage and competence in their purest form, untainted by prejudice or preconception. Captain Miller's eyes opened again, more focused this time. He looked directly at Jasmine. "You," he whispered, recognition dawning that this child had saved his life. Jasmine simply nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. "Save your strength, Captain. The paramedics will be here soon." As the aircraft began its final approach to Denver International Airport, Jasmine continued to monitor Captain Miller's condition, her small fingers regularly checking his pulse, her eyes evaluating his breathing and color. The AED remained attached, ready to deliver another shock if needed, though each passing minute with a sustained heartbeat improved the prognosis. 2 minutes to landing, First Officer Turner announced. "Everyone secure yourselves as best you can while maintaining care." Dr. Klein found an empty jump seat to strap into, while Dr. Blake braced herself against the cockpit wall. Jasmine, however, remained firmly by Captain Miller's side, one hand on his wrist monitoring his pulse, the other steadying herself against his chair. "You should secure yourself," Karen said from the doorway, her tone lacking its earlier condescension. Jasmine shook her head. "His condition could change in seconds. I need to be ready to restart CPR immediately if his heart stops again." The aircraft touched down with a firm jolt, then rapidly decelerated. Despite the turbulence of landing, Jasmine maintained her position, her focus on Captain Miller's vital signs unwavering. As the plane taxied rapidly toward the gate where emergency vehicles waited with flashing lights, First Officer Turner glanced back at the extraordinary scene in her cockpit, a critically ill pilot being kept alive through the knowledge and determination of an 8-year-old girl who refused to be defined by others' expectations. "We're here," Turner announced as the aircraft came to a stop. "Emergency services are boarding now." Jasmine nodded, still monitoring Captain Miller's pulse. "His heart rate is faster than before, but steadier." "That's a positive sign." Within moments, the aircraft door opened, and paramedics rushed aboard, medical equipment in hand. As they entered the cockpit, they paused momentarily at the unexpected sight of a young child actively providing medical care to the pilot. Suspected myocardial infarction leading to cardiac arrest, Jasmine reported professionally, stepping back to give the paramedics access. 2 rounds of defibrillation were required to restore rhythm. Patient regained consciousness approximately 6 minutes ago but remains disoriented and weak. The lead paramedic blinked in surprise at the clinical assessment coming from such a young source but quickly refocused on his patient. "Thank you," he said simply, before turning his full attention to Captain Miller. As the medical team took over, Jasmine finally allowed herself to be led from the cockpit. Her small shoulders sagged with exhaustion, the adrenaline that had sustained her beginning to ebb. Yet her eyes remained alert, watching carefully as the paramedics transferred Captain Miller to a stretcher. "You did it," Maxwell said quietly as she emerged into the cabin. "You actually saved his life." Jasmine looked up at him, her expression simultaneously childlike and ancient. "I just knew what to do," she replied simply. Anyone with the same knowledge could have done it. But everyone who had witnessed her actions knew this wasn't true. It wasn't just knowledge that had saved Captain Miller, it was courage, determination, and an unwillingness to be limited by others' prejudices. In the face of life's most basic truth, its fragility, all artificial barriers had fallen away, leaving only the pure humanity of one person fighting to save another. The paramedics worked with practiced efficiency, stabilizing Captain Miller for transport to the nearest cardiac center. They had attached their own medical equipment, confirming what Jasmine had already determined: the pilot had suffered a major heart attack followed by cardiac arrest, but prompt CPR and defibrillation had prevented the worst outcomes. Starting second 4 line, one paramedic announced while another adjusted oxygen flow through a mask covering Miller's face. Captain Miller's eyes fluttered open again, more alert now as medication entered his system. His gaze searched the crowded space until he found Jasmine, standing slightly back from the medical team but still monitoring everything they did with professional interest. "The girl," he whispered through the oxygen mask, his voice barely audible. "Bring her here." The lead paramedic glanced at Jasmine, then back to his patient. "Sir, we need to get you to the hospital immediately." "Please," Miller insisted, his voice strengthening slightly. "Just for a moment." The paramedic nodded reluctantly and gestured for Jasmine to approach. She stepped forward, her expression solemn beyond her years. "You performed CPR," Miller said, each word requiring visible effort. "You saved me." Jasmine nodded. "Yes, sir. My mom taught me how. She's an ER nurse." A hint of a smile appeared beneath the oxygen mask. "She taught you well." His eyes, though still pained, held clarity and profound gratitude. "Thank you. I have grandchildren your age. Because of you, I'll see them again." The simple statement carried enormous weight, acknowledging what everyone present understood: without Jasmine's intervention, Captain Miller would almost certainly have died before reaching medical care. "You're welcome, sir," Jasmine replied with the straightforward sincerity of childhood. "I want to be a cardiothoracic surgeon someday. I hope you make a full recovery." Miller's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, his smile widening despite his condition. "With that kind of determination, I have no doubt you'll achieve it." The lead paramedic gently interrupted. "We really need to transport him now." Jasmine stepped back as the medical team prepared to move the captain from the aircraft to the waiting ambulance. First Officer Turner, having completed her immediate post-landing responsibilities, approached to check on her colleague. "Prognosis?" she asked the paramedic quietly. "Good, considering the circumstances," he replied. Without immediate intervention, cardiac arrest at 37,000 feet is usually fatal. He received textbook perfect CPR and early defibrillation. He glanced at Jasmine with undisguised amazement. That child saved his life, no question about it. As the paramedics carefully maneuvered the stretcher through the narrow cabin, passengers who had remained seated during the emergency landing watched in solemn silence. Word had spread throughout the aircraft about what had transpired, how a young black girl, initially mocked by a flight attendant, had stepped forward to save the pilot's life. From her position near the galley, Karen Bailey observed the scene with complex emotions playing across her face. The confidence with which she had dismissed Jasmine earlier had evaporated, replaced by a dawning recognition of her own prejudice. She had nearly prevented a child from saving a man's life because she couldn't see past her preconceptions about race and age. The realization was profoundly uncomfortable. Throughout her career, Karen had considered herself professional and fair-minded. She had never used racial slurs or engaged in overt discrimination. Yet when confronted with a brilliant black child, she had immediately, instinctively assumed incompetence and inappropriateness, judgments based not on Jasmine's actual abilities but on deeply ingrained biases Karen had never fully acknowledged. As the medical team exited with Captain Miller, First Officer Turner addressed the passengers over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during this emergency. Captain Miller has been stabilized and is being transported to a nearby hospital. I'm pleased to inform you that his prognosis is positive, thanks largely to the extraordinary actions of one of our passengers." A spontaneous round of applause broke out in the cabin. Many passengers craned their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of Jasmine, who stood quietly near the cockpit door, seemingly embarrassed by the attention. Turner continued, "We'll be deplaning shortly. The airline is arranging alternative transportation to Los Angeles. Customer service representatives will meet you at the gate with details." As passengers began gathering their belongings, Tanya approached Jasmine. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. That was intense, even for trained professionals. Jasmine nodded, though the adrenaline crash was evident in her drooping shoulders. "I'm okay. Just tired. And..." She glanced down at her stained yellow sundress. "I think my dress is ruined." Tanya smiled warmly. "I think that's the least important thing right now. You were amazing in there." From the other side of the galley, Karen approached hesitantly. The usual confidence in her posture was absent, replaced by an unfamiliar humility. She stopped before Jasmine, visibly struggling to find appropriate words. "I owe you an apology," she finally said, her voice tight with emotion. "I treated you unfairly. I made assumptions about you that were wrong, and I behaved unprofessionally." Jasmine regarded her with a maturity that made the adult feel childish by comparison. "You judged me by my skin color and my age," she said simply, not accusingly but stating facts. "My mom says that happens sometimes, and I shouldn't let it stop me." Karen flinched slightly at the direct assessment but didn't deny it. "Your mother is wise," she acknowledged. "And she's raised an extraordinary daughter." She paused, then added with genuine remorse, "I'm truly sorry for how I treated you." Across the cabin, Maxwell Thompson had been observing the interaction while gathering his belongings. He approached now, his earlier annoyance at being seated beside a child completely transformed. "What you did today was remarkable," he told Jasmine sincerely. "Not just the medical intervention, but how you handled yourself throughout this flight, despite being treated poorly." He shot a pointed glance at Karen, who had the grace to look ashamed. Jasmine thanked him quietly, clearly uncomfortable with the praise but appreciative nonetheless. As other passengers began to deplane, many stopped to express similar sentiments, creating an impromptu receiving line around the young girl. Meanwhile, Tanya had pulled Karen aside for a private conversation in the rear galley. "This needs to be addressed formally," she said, her usual friendly demeanor replaced by professional seriousness. "Your treatment of that child was discriminatory and violated company policy." Karen nodded, making no attempt to defend herself. "I know. I'll self-report to management." She stared distantly out the galley window. "I've always thought of myself as fair-minded, you know. Not racist. But today you learned that prejudice isn't always about conscious hatred," Tanya finished for her. "Sometimes it's assumptions we don't even realize we're making." Karen's eyes filled with tears. "She could have been my daughter's classmate. If she'd been white, would I have dismissed her so quickly? Would I have mocked her aspirations?" The questions were rhetorical, their answers painfully obvious. "The question now," Tanya said more gently, "is what you'll do with this realization." As the last passengers deplaned, Karen retreated to the empty rear cabin, needing a moment alone to process. Her entire self-concept had been upended in the span of a few hours. She found herself remembering a long-buried childhood memory, herself at 10 years old, announcing to her father that she wanted to become a pilot. His dismissive laugh and pat response, "Sweetheart, wouldn't you rather be a flight attendant?" Much more suitable for a girl, had eventually shaped her career path. Had she just done the same thing to Jasmine? Imposed limitations based on nothing but prejudice? The parallel was uncomfortable but undeniable. In the forward cabin, airline officials had boarded to assess the situation and arrange continued travel for the diverted passengers. When they learned what had transpired, they immediately surrounded Jasmine, expressing both amazement and gratitude. "The airline would like to cover your expenses while in Denver," one representative explained to her. "We'll also arrange priority transportation to Los Angeles as soon as you're ready to continue your journey." Jasmine nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the attention and the aftermath of the emergency. "I just need to call my mom," she said quietly. "She'll be worried when she hears about the diversion." First Officer Turner, overhearing this, approached with a satellite phone. "Use this," she offered. "It will connect even though we're on the ground." Jasmine accepted the phone gratefully. When her mother answered, the composed demeanor that had characterized her throughout the emergency finally cracked. "Mama," she said, her voice suddenly that of an 8-year-old again, "something happened on the plane." As she recounted the events to her mother, the adults around her exchanged glances, reminded anew that despite her extraordinary capabilities, Jasmine was still a child, one who had just performed under pressure that would challenge most adults. Meanwhile, passengers who had deplaned were already spreading the story. Social media posts about the child medical prodigy, who saved a pilot's life were gathering thousands of shares. Local news crews, initially responding to reports of an emergency landing, were now requesting interviews with the young hero. In less than an hour, Jasmine Washington had transformed from an anonymous child facing discrimination to a national sensation, her story challenging assumptions about capability, race, and age in the most dramatic possible way. As the Denver afternoon sunlight streamed through the aircraft windows, illuminating the scene of an extraordinary convergence of crisis and courage, everyone present understood they had witnessed something profound, a moment when prejudice had nearly cost a life, and knowledge had transcended all artificial barriers to save one. The terminal at Denver International Airport buzzed with unusual activity. Gate B32, normally just another node in the vast network of air travel, had transformed into the epicenter of an unfolding human interest story that captured attention across the facility. Airport employees, travelers from other flights, and a growing contingent of media representatives gathered as word spread about the remarkable mid-air emergency and the even more remarkable child who had resolved it. Outside on the tarmac, the ambulance carrying Captain Miller sped away, lights flashing but sirens silent, a positive sign that his condition, while serious, had stabilized. Paramedics had classified him as critical but stable, medical terminology that acknowledged both the gravity of his cardiac event and the effectiveness of Jasmine's intervention. Inside the terminal, airline officials escorted Jasmine through the jetway, flanked by Tanya and First Officer Turner. The young girl looked simultaneously exhausted and alert, her eyes taking in the unexpected commotion with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The yellow sundress that had been the target of Karen's earlier mockery now bore the evidence of her life-saving efforts, orange juice stains joined by smears of blood and the residue of adhesive medical pads. "There's quite a crowd," First Officer Turner warned gently as they approached the gate area. "The airline's communications team is trying to manage the situation, but word travels fast. You don't have to talk to anyone if you don't want to." Jasmine nodded appreciatively but squared her small shoulders. "It's okay. My mom says when you do something important, sometimes you have to explain it to people so they can learn." Turner smiled at the wisdom in this response. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She is," Jasmine agreed simply. "She's going to fly here tonight. The airline already arranged it." As they emerged into the terminal, the waiting crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. Jasmine blinked in surprise, momentarily frozen by the unexpected response. Most of the faces were unfamiliar, fellow travelers and airport staff drawn by the extraordinary story. But among them stood passengers from the flight, many nodding respectfully or smiling encouragement at the child who had remained so composed during their shared crisis. Maxwell Thompson stood near the front, having rushed ahead to ensure he didn't miss Jasmine's arrival. Beside him, a woman in a Denver International Airport security uniform was already implementing crowd control measures, creating space for the young girl to pass through without being overwhelmed. Ms. Washington, a woman in a tailored suit approached, extending her hand. "I'm Patricia Montgomery, Chief Communications Officer for the airline. On behalf of everyone at the company, I want to express our profound gratitude for your actions today." Jasmine shook the offered hand with the solemnity of a diplomat at a state function. "Thank you, ma'am. Is there any news about Captain Miller?" Patricia smiled at the child's priorities. "The hospital called a few minutes ago. He's being prepped for emergency cardiac catheterization, a procedure to examine his heart and clear any blockages. The cardiologist believes his prognosis is good, largely due to the prompt and effective CPR he received." Jasmine nodded, visibly relieved. "That's good. Myocardial tissue begins to die after about 20 minutes without oxygen. Since we restored circulation quickly, he should have minimal heart damage." Patricia blinked at the clinical assessment coming from such a young source, then continued. "We've arranged a private lounge for you to rest while we sort out the continuing transportation. There's also a change of clothes waiting for you there." "Thank you," Jasmine replied, suddenly conscious of her stained dress. "May I call my mother again when we get there? I want to let her know I'm okay." "Of course. She's actually already on her way to the airport." We've arranged a priority flight for her. As they made their way through the terminal, several passengers from the flight approached to express their gratitude and admiration. Dr. Klein, the dentist who had assisted during the emergency, stopped Jasmine with a gentle touch on her shoulder. "I've been practicing dentistry for 15 years, he said, shaking his head in wonderment. "I take required CPR training every 2 years. But what you did in there? That was beyond anything I could have managed. You have an extraordinary gift." Jasmine thanked him quietly, her natural humility evident despite her exhaustion. As they continued toward the private lounge, a commotion near the customer service desk caught their attention. Karen Bailey stood there, engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion with airline management representatives. "I understand the seriousness of the situation," she was saying, her voice tight with emotion. "I'm not trying to excuse my behavior. I'm requesting a formal review." The airline manager nodded gravely. "Given the circumstances and the multiple witness accounts, you're facing potential disciplinary action up to and including termination. Your conduct violated our non-discrimination policies in multiple ways." Karen nodded, accepting this assessment without protest. "I know. And I'll accept whatever consequences are appropriate. But I'd like the opportunity to apologize properly to Ms. Washington before any decisions are made." Jasmine, overhearing this exchange, surprised everyone by approaching the desk. "It's okay," she said quietly. "She already apologized on the plane." The airline officials turned in surprise, not having noticed the child's approach. Karen's eyes widened, her composed professional demeanor cracking to reveal genuine remorse. "Jasmine," she began, unconsciously using the girl's first name rather than the distancing, young lady, she had employed earlier. "What I said on the plane wasn't enough. I treated you terribly because of assumptions I made based on your race and your age. I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry." Jasmine regarded her thoughtfully, with a maturity that made several adults shift uncomfortably. "My grandfather used to say that apologies are just words unless they change how you act tomorrow," she said finally. "Are you going to treat other kids like me differently now?" Karen nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Yes. I promise I will." Patricia Montgomery, witnessing this exchange, made a note on her tablet. "Ms. Bailey, will take this conversation into consideration during the review process. For now, you're suspended pending investigation, as per company policy." Karen accepted this without argument and turned to leave. As she did, Jasmine called after her. "Ms. Bailey? Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is learning from them." The simple wisdom of this statement, delivered without condescension or bitterness, affected everyone who heard it. Karen nodded once, unable to speak through her emotion, and walked away toward an uncertain professional future, but perhaps a more enlightened personal one. In the private airline lounge, Jasmine finally had a moment of quiet. A fresh dress, not yellow but a deep purple with subtle silver stars, had been procured from an airport shop, along with necessary toiletries. After changing and washing the traces of dried blood from her hands and face, she looked more like the 8-year-old child she was, though her eyes retained the gravity of her recent experience. The lounge door opened to admit Tanya, now off duty but still in uniform. "There's someone here to see you," she announced with a smile. "A special visitor. Dar." James Richardson, the cardiologist who had taken charge of Captain Miller's care, entered the lounge. Still wearing surgical scrubs, he had clearly come directly from the hospital. "Ms. Washington," he greeted Jasmine formally, extending his hand. "I wanted to thank you personally. Captain Miller just came through his procedure successfully. We placed 2 stents to open blocked coronary arteries." "Did you use drug-eluting or bare metal stents?" Jasmine asked without hesitation. Dr. Richardson raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised by the technical question. "Drug-eluting," he answered. "They reduce the risk of restenosis." Jasmine nodded seriously. "That's what I've read too. Will he need cardiac rehabilitation?" Yes, several weeks at minimum, the cardiologist confirmed, increasingly amazed by this conversation. But his prognosis is excellent. The damage to his heart muscle was minimal, which is remarkable considering he experienced full cardiac arrest at altitude. He paused, then added with professional admiration, "Your CPR technique was perfect. Where did you learn such advanced skills?" "My mother," Jasmine explained. "She's an ER nurse at Harlem Hospital. She taught me everything she knows about emergency cardiac care." Dr. Richardson shook his head in wonderment. "Well, she did an extraordinary job. As did you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "I'm on the admissions committee for the University of Colorado School of Medicine. In about 10 years, when you're ready for medical school, I hope you'll consider us. We need physicians with your kind of talent and composure under pressure." Jasmine accepted the card with wide eyes, the first truly childlike expression she'd shown since the emergency began. "Thank you, sir. I will." As Dr. Richardson departed, airline officials entered with updates. Word of Jasmine's heroism had spread rapidly through social media and news outlets. Local television stations were requesting interviews, and national morning shows had already reached out to the airline's public relations department. "We understand this is overwhelming," Patricia Montgomery explained gently. "You're under no obligation to speak to anyone. Your privacy is our priority." Before Jasmine could respond, another airline representative entered with exciting news. "Your mother's flight has been expedited. She'll be landing in approximately 45 minutes. Relief washed over Jasmine's face at this announcement. Despite her remarkable composure throughout the emergency, she was still a child who needed her mother after an intensely traumatic experience. Meanwhile, in the main terminal, passengers from the diverted flight were sharing their accounts with increasing excitement. Maxwell Thompson, usually reserved and focused solely on business matters, found himself enthusiastically recounting Jasmine's actions to fellow travelers and airline staff. The flight attendant had been horrible to her, he explained to a growing audience. Mocking her dress, her medical interests, treating her like she was out of place in first class. Then when the emergency happened, that same child stepped up and saved the pilot's life with more knowledge and composure than any of the adults. Similar conversations echoed throughout the terminal as the story spread. Many passengers who had witnessed Karen's discriminatory behavior were filing formal complaints with the airline, providing detailed accounts of her actions and statements. Tanya Rodriguez had already submitted her official statement, documenting both Karen's pattern of microaggressions and Jasmine's extraordinary response to the emergency. Her report concluded with a professional assessment that pulled no punches. Ms. Bailey's behavior represented the worst kind of discrimination. The type that could have cost Captain Miller his life had others not intervened to allow Jasmine Washington to provide life-saving care. In the hospital across town, Captain Miller lay in the cardiac care unit, his condition stabilizing thanks to the successful stent placement. His wife Janet sat beside his bed, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness, the medication making him groggy but comfortable. "The doctor says you're going to be fine," she reassured him during a lucid moment. "They said the damage was minimal because of how quickly you received CPR." "The girl," Miller mumbled, his voice weak but insistent. "Have they thanked the girl properly?" "The airline is taking good care of her," Janet assured him. "It's all over the news, the child who saved a pilot's life. They're calling her a hero." Miller nodded slightly. "She is. Make sure they know that." His eyes closed again as the medication pulled him back towards sleep, but not before he added, "She'll be an amazing doctor someday." Back at the airport, Jasmine had finally succumbed to the exhaustion that follows extreme stress and adrenaline. Curled up on a lounge sofa, she had fallen into a deep sleep, her small body finally relaxing after hours of extraordinary tension. Tanya had placed a blanket over her, and airline staff moved quietly around the room, ensuring her rest remained undisturbed. When Denise Washington arrived, rushing into the lounge with the frantic energy of a mother who has traveled hundreds of miles in a state of controlled panic. She stopped short at the sight of her daughter sleeping peacefully. For a moment, she simply watched Jasmine breathe, the profound relief of finding her child safe overwhelming any desire to wake her. Patricia Montgomery approached quietly. "Ms. Washington? I'm Patricia from the airline. Your daughter is quite extraordinary." Denise nodded, her eyes never leaving Jasmine. "Yes," she agreed softly. "She always has been." Then, with the practicality of a medical professional who has seen countless emergencies, she asked, "How's the pilot?" "Stable, thanks to Jasmine. The cardiologist said her CPR technique was textbook perfect." A small smile touched Denise's lips. "We practiced for hours on that mannequin. I never thought she'd need to use it so soon." As mother and airline representative spoke in hushed tones, sharing details of the remarkable events, Jasmine stirred slightly in her sleep. Even in unconsciousness, her hand moved in the rhythmic pattern of chest compressions, 1, 2, 3, 4, the life-saving cadence now embedded in her muscle memory. Outside the private lounge, the story continued to spread, moving from local news to national outlets, from social media posts to viral videos. By nightfall, Jasmine Washington would be known across the country. The brilliant child who faced discrimination with dignity, then saved the life of the very system's representative. It was a story that challenged assumptions, that forced uncomfortable reflections on prejudice and potential, that reminded a divided nation that knowledge transcends all artificial barriers when life itself hangs in the balance. 1 week later, the sprawling campus of the Williams Science Academy in California buzzed with unusual energy. Typically a haven of focused academic pursuit, today the prestigious institution had transformed into something approaching a media event. News vans lined the normally tranquil entrance drive, reporters checked lighting and sound levels, and security personnel maintained a respectful but firm perimeter around the main academic building. The reason for this extraordinary attention stood in a quiet side room, away from the cameras and commotion. Jasmine Washington, dressed in a new purple dress that had replaced her stained yellow sundress, reviewed her notes with the serious concentration that characterized everything she did. Beside her, Denise straightened her daughter's collar with practiced maternal care. "Remember, you don't have to do this interview if you don't want to," Denise reminded her. "The Academy understands, and so does the Medical Association." Jasmine looked up from her notes. "I want to do it, Mama. If it helps other kids like me be taken seriously, then it's important." Denise nodded, recognizing the determination in her daughter's eyes. The past week had been a whirlwind of attention and accolades. The story of the 8-year-old who had saved a pilot's life after facing discrimination had captivated the national imagination, generating conversations about prejudice, potential, and the artificial limitations imposed on children of color. Captain Miller had been released from the hospital 3 days earlier, his recovery progressing well thanks to the minimal heart damage resulting from Jasmine's prompt intervention. His first act upon discharge had been to contact the airline's public relations department, insisting on personally thanking his young savior. That reunion had taken place yesterday, when Miller and his wife had visited Jasmine at the science camp. The emotional meeting. The recovered pilot embracing the small girl who had kept him alive, had been captured by a single photographer permitted to document the moment. The resulting image had already appeared on newspaper front pages across the country, Captain Miller kneeling to Jasmine's height, their hands clasped, his expression conveying a gratitude beyond words. "It's time," announced Patricia Montgomery, who had accompanied Jasmine and Denise to California to manage the continuing media interest. "The auditorium is ready whenever you are." Mother and daughter exchanged a look of mutual support, then followed Patricia through the corridor toward the Academy's main auditorium. As they walked, they passed a bulletin board where a hastily printed sign announced, "Special lecture today, Jasmine Washington on emergency cardiac care." Beneath it, a handwritten addition read, "Our youngest instructor ever." The auditorium fell silent as Jasmine entered. Filled beyond capacity, the room contained an unusual mix of attendees, science camp students ranging from middle school to high school age, academy faculty, medical professionals from nearby universities, and a carefully controlled contingent of media representatives. Dr. William Chen, the Academy's director, welcomed Jasmine to the podium, adjusting the microphone to her height. Today we have the extraordinary privilege of learning from someone who reminds us that knowledge recognizes no boundaries of age or background. Ms. Washington will share her experience performing life-saving CPR at 37,000 feet, followed by a special presentation from the American Medical Association. Jasmine approached the microphone with the same quiet confidence she had displayed throughout the in-flight emergency. Though her head barely cleared the podium, her voice carried clearly through the room. "Last week, I was just a girl excited about attending science camp," she began. "I never expected to use my medical knowledge to save someone's life. But emergencies don't wait for convenient timing, and medical knowledge doesn't care how old you are or what you look like." As Jasmine recounted the events of the flight, the initial discrimination she faced, the medical crisis that followed, and the life-saving intervention she provided, the audience listened in rapt attention. Medical professionals nodded appreciatively at her accurate terminology and clear understanding of cardiac physiology, while students leaned forward, inspired by a peer who had accomplished something so extraordinary. "CPR isn't difficult to learn," Jasmine emphasized as she demonstrated the proper hand position on a mannequin that had been provided. "But it requires practice and confidence. My mother always taught me that knowledge itself isn't enough, you need the courage to apply it when it matters." At the back of the auditorium, a late arrival slipped quietly through the door. Karen Bailey, no longer in her flight attendant uniform but dressed in civilian clothes, found an inconspicuous seat in the last row. Her presence was unexpected. She remained on administrative suspension pending the airline's investigation into her conduct, but she had traveled at her own expense, drawn by a need to witness this moment. As Jasmine concluded her presentation to enthusiastic applause, Dr. Alicia Ramirez from the American Medical Association took the stage. "Ms. Washington," she began formally, "your actions aboard that flight exemplify the highest ideals of medical practice, knowledge, courage, and compassion without prejudice. In recognition of your extraordinary service, the American Medical Association has established the Jasmine Washington Scholarship for Underprivileged Youth in Medicine." Gasps and applause filled the auditorium as Dr. Ramirez unveiled a ceremonial check representing the endowment for the new scholarship program. This fund will support young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who demonstrate exceptional potential for careers in medicine, ensuring that future Jasmine Washingtons have the opportunity to pursue their dreams without financial barriers. Tears filled Denise's eyes as she watched her daughter accept this honor with the same composure she had shown throughout the past extraordinary week. From a single mother working double shifts to provide opportunities for her gifted child, to the parent of a nationally recognized hero whose name would help countless other children, the journey seemed almost unbelievable. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled during a reception, Jasmine found herself surrounded by science camp students eager to meet the young medical prodigy. She answered their questions with patience and enthusiasm, already embodying the teaching spirit essential to great physicians. Across the room, Denise was engaged in conversation with Dr. Ramirez when she noticed Karen Bailey standing hesitantly at the edge of the gathering. Their eyes met briefly, and after a moment's consideration, Denise excused herself and approached the former flight attendant. "Ms. Washington," Karen began awkwardly. "I'm sorry to intrude. I needed to be here." Denise studied the woman who had discriminated against her daughter. "The airline told us about your suspension." Karen nodded, accepting this without defense. "It's appropriate. What I did was wrong." She paused, struggling to articulate feelings she was still processing. "I've spent my life thinking I wasn't prejudiced because I never used slurs or overtly discriminated. But seeing your daughter save that man's life after how I treated her, it forced me to recognize biases I never acknowledged." "Recognition is the first step," Denise replied, neither condemning nor absolving. "What matters is what you do next." "I've enrolled in an intensive diversity training program," Karen said. Not the corporate-mandated kind, but a comprehensive course developed by sociologists and racial justice advocates. And I've been speaking with my nieces and nephews about Jasmine's story, helping them understand that brilliance comes in all colors and ages. Denise nodded thoughtfully. Then something good has come from this, beyond the obvious. Across the room, Jasmine had noticed her mother speaking with Karen. Excusing herself from the students, she approached the two women, her expression curious but not hostile. "Hello, Ms. Bailey," she said politely. "I didn't expect to see you here." Karen looked down at the child who had inadvertently triggered her profound self-examination. "I wanted to see you receive the recognition you deserve," she said simply. "And to tell you that your grandfather was right about apologies. Mine won't just be words. I promise." Jasmine nodded, accepting this commitment with the seriousness it deserved. Before she could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. Captain Miller had arrived, walking slowly but steadily with his wife beside him. "I couldn't miss this," he explained as he made his way to Jasmine. "My doctors cleared me for short outings, and this was top of my list." The room rearranged itself naturally to accommodate this reunion, creating a circle around Jasmine, her mother, Captain Miller, and Karen, the key figures in a story that had transcended a simple medical emergency to become a powerful commentary on prejudice, potential, and redemption. "I have something for you," Miller said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box and handed it to Jasmine. Inside lay his pilot's wings, the coveted symbol of his profession, normally worn with immense pride on his uniform. "These are usually earned through years of training and thousands of flight hours," he explained. "But no pilot I know has demonstrated more courage in the air than you did last week. I want you to have them." Jasmine accepted the gift with trembling hands, her composure finally cracking to reveal the child beneath the extraordinary composure. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. As photographers captured this poignant moment, Karen stood slightly apart, watching with an expression that reflected her ongoing journey from prejudice to understanding. When Jasmine looked up and caught her eye, Karen gave a small, respectful nod, acknowledging both her past failure and her commitment to change. Jasmine returned the nod, then turned to the assembled crowd. The academy director had requested she deliver closing remarks, and she had prepared carefully for this moment. "A week ago, I faced discrimination because of assumptions made about my skin color and my age," she began, her voice strengthening with each word. "Those same assumptions nearly prevented me from saving Captain Miller's life. But knowledge and skill transcend prejudice, and saving that life changed multiple lives that day, including my own." She looked around the room, making eye contact with students, medical professionals, and even Karen as she continued. "I still want to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. And now I know for certain that I can be. More importantly, I hope other children who look like me will see this story and know that they don't have to limit their dreams based on other people's limited imaginations." The applause that followed was thunderous, a standing ovation that recognized not just an extraordinary act of heroism but the profound wisdom in Jasmine's message. As the ceremony concluded and attendees began to depart, Karen approached Captain Miller, introducing herself with visible discomfort. "You were the senior flight attendant," he recognized immediately. "Yes," she acknowledged, not shying away from his identification. "The one who nearly prevented Ms. Washington from saving your life because of my prejudice." Miller studied her for a moment. "Yet you're here, facing that truth. That takes a different kind of courage." "Much less than hers," Karen replied, glancing toward Jasmine, who was now surrounded by young science campers seeking autographs on their program booklets. "Or yours, surviving what you did." "We all have our journeys," Miller said philosophically, the brush with mortality having deepened his perspective. "The important thing is to learn as we travel." As the afternoon sun slanted through the auditorium windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden beams, the various participants in this remarkable story found themselves forever changed by their intersection on a routine flight that had become anything but ordinary. Jasmine Washington had boarded that plane as a gifted child facing familiar prejudice. She departed it as someone who had demonstrated, in the most dramatic possible way, that knowledge and courage transcend all artificial boundaries. That transcendence had not only saved a life but had triggered ripples of transformation that would continue long after the media attention faded. In that moment, surrounded by new friends and opportunities, Jasmine embodied her own powerful message: no one's potential should be limited by another's preconceptions. It was a lesson written not in theory but in life-saving action, and in the changed hearts of everyone who witnessed it. What's your response to this powerful story of prejudice, heroism, and transformation? Comment below if you've ever witnessed or experienced judgment based on appearance or age. Like this video if you believe we should judge people by their abilities rather than their external characteristics. Subscribe for more inspirational true stories that challenge our assumptions and remind us of our shared humanity. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that extraordinary potential exists in unexpected places. Thank you for watching, and remember, knowledge transcends all artificial barriers when it matters most. This story powerfully illustrates how prejudice can blind us to human potential. Karen's assumptions about Jasmine, based solely on her race and age, nearly prevented a life-saving intervention. It reminds us that expertise and ability aren't determined by skin color, age, or appearance. The transformation we witness in Karen highlights an important truth. Recognizing our biases is the first step toward overcoming them. Her journey from discrimination to self-awareness demonstrates that people can change when confronted with the harmful consequences of their prejudice. Jasmine's resilience teaches us about dignity in the face of discrimination. Rather than allowing Karen's treatment to diminish her, she remained focused on her purpose and abilities. Her mother's guidance, "Their prejudice reflects their character, not mine," provides a powerful framework for maintaining self-worth despite others' judgments. Captain Miller's experience shows how artificial barriers fall away when fundamental human needs arise. In life's most critical moments, what matters isn't race, age, or status, but knowledge, skill, and courage. Ultimately, this story challenges us to examine our own assumptions and recognize the extraordinary potential that exists in unexpected places. It calls us to create a world where knowledge truly transcends all artificial barriers.